from your experience, at what age children can receive the Lord? Is there an age, or they are too little to do that?
That's a good question. I think there's no age limit or number or year that we should look to, because children all develop at different speeds. I think if they're brought up in the fear and admonition of the Lord from day one, and they see their parents reading the Bible, they see their parents loving one another. That's the best thing that you can do for your children, by the way, is to love their parent, their other parent. That these children are going to be accepting the Lord probably at 2 or 3 years old, maybe, just as, by the time they can actually comprehend these things, or maybe younger. And sometimes children are absolutely neglected and don't know anything about church. Parents don't go to church. And the child ends up wanting to go to church, and ends up, even I've got stories where the kids actually go to church without their parents. And because they're hungry for the truth, they're hungry for the things that are genuine, because children they're straight from heaven, and they came from a place of goodness and truth, and they don't like this snake pit. So neither do we, but they're looking for that return of stability, that love, that trust, that genuine. And of course, that's why they're going to gravitate towards truth and towards God. Children are much easier to lead to the Lord because they don't have all the skepticism. They're not jaded. They have not been programmed by 25, 30, 40 years of indoctrination and political propaganda. And so they have just these little pure, clear minds, and they can easily understand. They don't know all the technical spiritual backdrop of Jesus dying on the cross and why he had to die and why he had to shed his blood. That can come later. But when you tell them the stories of, Daniel in the lion's den, and David and Goliath, and Moses and the Red Sea opening up, when you begin to speak to them these stories, that becomes to them the basis of their faith and expectation. And so these are the foundational things. So the Bible, children's Bible stories are basic foundations to give them another worldview, a God worldview, as opposed to the world who's giving them mythology and New Age and Harry Potter and all that stuff, which is basically a bunch of smoke and mirrors and lies, as opposed to the solid, substantial truth about God, his character, his actions, what he's done through the books in the Bible. So any age where they're ready, and I think that might be a parent's thing, to be sensitive. Well, honey, there are teachable moments. So, honey, are you ready? Do you want to accept Jesus? Here's what that means. Have him come into your heart. And, that means that you're agreeing basically with, he died on the cross for you. He shed his blood so that you can get to heaven. He rose from the dead. He's coming again. And he is if you say he's kind of like our way or our ticket kind of to get to heaven. I mean, you have to have a ticket to get in, and Jesus is the ticket. And so accepting him gives you that ticket. That's just one way. You could explain it a million different ways, but being sensitive to that teachable moment of when the child is ready is the time that they should be brought to the Lord.
Well, but how a parent can understand when the child is ready,
Well, I think that children are curious. Some of them are really fun. They ask a lot of deep questions, actually, about the world and about various things. They make funny observations. This comes to my mind. One of our daughters, when she was young, very young, probably 3 or 4. I got 2 stories, actually. Maybe she was younger, maybe 3. She said, we were eating a bowl of cherries, and she said, "Mom, why are there bones in these cherries?" She doesn't know cherries, a seed from a bone. Now, that's not necessarily a teachable moment, but that was a funny thing. And then a funny thing is when we, at the birth of our 4th daughter, the 3 older ones were all praying for her to have all of her fingers and all of her toes and make sure she was okay in every way. And then we brought her home, and the 3-year-old said, "Oh, Mom, we forgot to pray for her teeth." She has no teeth. And so that was, obviously a funny story. The kids are full of curious things like that. And you have to just be sensitive. That's a teachable moment. Okay, this is why she doesn't have any teeth. God didn't forget about your prayer. This is okay. And just teachable moments where you're aware of what they are thinking, because their little mouth will tell you what they're thinking. However, if you have trained them to shut up, be seen and not heard, stay out of the way, they will, after a while, they will not ask questions anymore. They will not develop their abilities to converse with people. One of our grandchildren was in a difficult situation. There was a divorce in the family, and there was a fear, and they were taught to have no needs, ask no questions, don't so you can't have any. So you're not going to communicate any problems. You're just going to stay in the background, stay in the shadows, so you don't get in trouble. And even now, years later, that child has a little bit more difficult time putting words together or conversing, because he was trained to not do that. And so, of course, that's unfortunate, but that can be fixed with conversation, with prayer. Those things don't have to stay that way. But that's just something to realize, that children are, I always say it this way, we always say they're acting naughty, but they're not really actors. They're reactors. They are reacting to the chaos around them, the frustration, the anxiety of the parent. And so they're actually, if your child is acting up and not being peaceful, either they have a critical need at that point and you need to pay attention, or you have to see they're responding to how I'm behaving. And so we always try to fix the child without going to the point of fixing our own behavior, and going to the Lord and saying, God, show me, give me wisdom for my own self, that I won't be creating this anxiety or this neurosis or whatever you want to call it in my child.